I just finished watching the very first episode of the 3-part docuseries that just came out on Netflix called Fit for TV about the show Biggest Loser. Now, if you remember, Biggest Loser aired from 2004 to about 2016, where it took a little bit of a break because of some controversy that we're definitely going to talk about. And then it came back briefly for a season in 2020. Listen, I have notes because I literally just finished watching this and I needed to talk to you about it as soon as possible. I needed us to chat and have a conversation. So I'm going to just go through my notes. These are the things that I was writing down as I watched the show. So let's start just with the title of this first episode, which was called Winning the Lottery. This is the episode where they really set you up to hear about the different auditions that happened, about the process, how the show was created, where the idea came from, those types of things, and really kind of give you an idea of a look into the mind of a person who would apply to be on Biggest Loser. Where were they in their life? What were they looking to get out of the show? What was the goal? Obviously weight loss, right? But what was the story behind it? The description was eager to transform their lives and bodies, hopefuls audition for The Biggest Loser. It's a big show, but is it all that it promises? Now, one thing that really shocked me was that the producers are involved. Remember in the last video, we were chatting it up and I was saying, hey, I don't know if the producers are going to be involved with this. I don't think this has anything to really do with them. They are involved. They are being interviewed throughout the entire series. So that definitely shocked me. Now, I want to say this happened before the first producer was introduced as the producer. It was kind of just like that montage before everything starts. But what I wrote down was that he was making an argument that these people would have died before ever getting on the show, and seemed to kind of have been in response to what they were showing on the montages, which, is that a word? Anyway, look, which one thing that they were showing was an episode where they put people in coffins, which was my next note. They put people in coffins with 3 exclamation points because what? Do you remember this? I remember it now that I've seen it, but at first I had no memory of this happening. But yes, they did physically put people in coffins and close the coffins to really get across the message of you could potentially die. And I guess that kind of ties into what the producer was saying originally, where he was saying, hey, look, if these people didn't get it together, they were going to die at some point, or they had this threat of potentially having health complications or having issues if they did not do the show. So the first former contestant that we really hear from and hear a little bit more about their story is Danny. Danny was from season 7, I want to say. And when Danny comes on, Danny starts talking about his story. He talks about how he struggled with his weight since the 3rd grade. And what really stood out to me about Danny was that he actually had auditioned for the show for 3 years straight. He auditioned, I want to say he was from season 7. I could be wrong. I need to see what it says in my notes as we go. But I think he was from season 7, so he would have auditioned for season 4, 5, 6, and then finally got the call at season 7. Now with Danny, he ended up losing 239 pounds over the course of about 6 months. So if you guys recall, right, we would tend to watch the show in January. That's when you see the big reveal, and that's live. They were flying out to actually do the show around May. So that's where we get the 6-month thing from. So the episodes we're watching are obviously all pre-recorded in January, and then the show ends up having a live at the end that comes and catches up in real time. So he had lost 239 pounds in that time. And something really interesting that Danny said that stood out to me was that he said he may have gained and lost and gained the same 1,000 pounds over the last 20 years. So he just said that he just keeps losing and regaining this weight. And mind you, I'm not telling you the biggest part, which you should have seen this because this is a discussion. You're supposed to watch the episode and then come back so we can discuss in the comments. But the biggest thing that I'm not telling you is that Danny is big, you guys. Danny has gained his weight back, possibly, and then some. I don't know if he does say that he's gained more weight than the show. I think in later episodes, spoiler alert, right? He might say that he's kind of close to that original weight. But this is really not a spoiler. If you have seen this first episode, you visually see what Danny's size is. So that's our introduction to Danny. Next, we get to the development of the show. So this is when we find out that the guy who made the statement earlier, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is the producer. And this is when I realized, oh my gosh, the producers are involved. I literally wrote that in my notes. I'm like, shock, the producers are involved. So here come the producers on screen. The first producer, his name is J.D. Roth. He is the executive producer. And then we have David Broom. He is also a producer on the show. Now, I believe it's David who talks about how he had the original idea for the show. He says that he was working, at a gym at the time, or there was a gym that he used to frequent. He was into fitness. And he said that there was a sign on this bulletin board that said, like, obese person, seeking trainer, need to change my life, or something like that. So when he saw that sign, that gave him the idea for the show, and thus that is how the show is birthed. And that's something that kind of is a theme throughout for him, where he continuously kind of pulls from this idea of like, this show was birthed from the fact that there was an obese person who was seeking this, even though that person may have not been seeking it directly from him or asking him for his involvement or whatever. The point is that gave him the idea of like, well, if this one person is posting this on a bulletin board, then there must be more people out there who have this same thought, have this same idea, have the same desire. So next we meet Ryan Benson. Now Ryan turns out to be the very first winner. He is the winner of season 1 of The Biggest Loser. I do not remember this season. I really don't remember too many of the earlier seasons. I would say like season 1 to 4 are just a little bit unclear for me. So I wonder if you remember that season. But Ryan Benson was the winner. And what stood out to me about him is that he talked a lot. His audition tape included a lot about how he was a secret eater, and that he would go and he would, get these particular donuts or something, and he would eat things in his car. So he talked about how his family, and I believe his wife at the time, did not know anything about the food that he was sneaking and eating. And I just thought, man, how many of us have that story? You would not believe how incredibly common it is to have that title of being a secret eater or, whatever. I had done that so many times. I can remember vividly going to gas stations and pulling over at gas stations to throw away all the stuff that I had in my car before I went home or before I went to work or before somebody was about to get in my car. So that was super relatable. And to just think back to the first season of the show and to know that people were submitting audition tapes that said things like that they were being so open, so vulnerable, it really just, showed and even reinforced what made the show so motivating. Of course, it was about, the working out and seeing the pounds drop, but I think it was also more so about the reflection of being able to see yourself in other people, whether it was like visibly seeing yourself, because the show did tend to be, or started to be eventually, quite diverse in the sense where, you could see yourself in a contestant visually, or you could see yourself in their habits, like with Ryan being the secret eater. A lot of people who struggle with their weight can most certainly look back at that, or look at that if they're currently in that situation and say, yes, I know exactly what that feels like. I know exactly what that is. So then they started talking about like who the host of the show was and really getting more into the development of the show. So if you guys remember, the host at the time of the original seasons was Caroline Ray. Now I want to say she was the host from season 1 to 4. So I do remember her being the host. So maybe I saw like that last season where she was the host before we ended up getting the new host. One thing that was pointed out about her is that she was a comedian. Now I remember Caroline from Sabrina the Teenage Witch. If you're a millennial, then you probably remember her from that as well. And then, of course, we saw her on shows like The Biggest Loser where she was hosting. Now, one thing about her that was pointed out is that she was a comedian. So it kind of made people, I guess, possibly assume that the goal of the show was to make fun of people, because otherwise, why would you particularly bring in a comedian to host a show, a reality show about people who are overweight, going through different challenges to lose weight? And then of course you have temptation rooms and things like that, and you have this person who tends to make jokes. I'm not too clear because I don't know about her about as much about her as a comedian, but from the clips that they showed of some of the jokes that she had made, some of them talked about weight and things like that. So again, it brings up that kind of thought of like, what is the purpose of the show? And is the purpose actually to make fun of people? And what exactly do you mean by Biggest Loser? So as they start getting into this whole conversation of whether or not the show is or is not a joke, or what the purpose of some of the things that they did on the show truly was, this is when the conversation of temptation challenges comes into play. And I know I talked about temptation challenges in the last video, but wow, was a memory sparked. Because one thing that I did not remember was a particular temptation challenge where not only were they presented, you know what I'm saying, with the food and have to see it, and then it's just a temptation of like, you better not eat that, you know, or if you eat that, you're going to have to work out more. But that's a whole other conversation, right? Trying to out exercise a bad diet. And so they get to this temptation challenge where I did not remember this, but apparently they had to build these towers out of food. But the only way that they could build the food tower was to pick up the food with their mouths. So here they are with all this super tempting food, savory food, sweet food, junk food, overprocessed food, all the foods that they're craving, that they want, that they're trying to literally heal their relationship with so that they can lose this weight. And they have them pick up the food with their mouths and build this tower. For me, this completely kills the argument of, well, the temptation challenges are meant to, you know, make this appear more like real life, right? Where in real life are you encountering this endless amount of pre-prepared food that you don't have to do anything with, you don't have to pay for it, you don't have to do anything to prepare it? Like, where are you encountering things like that? And then you have to pick up the food with your mouth. You know, it gets to a point, but I understand, right? Because you want to have temptation challenges, as the producer said, right? If they didn't have the temptation challenges, then it would have been a critique about, well, this is not like real life. This is like a controlled, you know, environment and study. So they brought these things in. But then, you know, did they have to take it that far? Absolutely not. But did people, I guess, enjoy, you know, watching that and seeing that? Were they at least intrigued and entertained by it? I mean, when you have 10 million people watching something weekly, like, for a couple months on end, in terms of how often the show airs. I think it airs over like a 2-month period, like 9 weeks. And so people are weekly tuning in by the tens of millions, right? That's not really something that's going to make them say, hey, let's not include this. It's going to be something that's going to ramp it up. And that's exactly what happened. Now, remember, Danny had lost 239 pounds. He said that he was doing an hour and a half of cardio in the mornings. He was working out also during lunchtime. And then he said that during those last 10 days leading up to his weigh-in, where he had lost that 239 pounds, he did not eat. He was doing something that I know you're going to be in the comments telling me that you were doing as well, which was that cayenne pepper, honey or maple syrup, lemon, whatever that little concoction was. What was it called? Did I write it down? What it was called? Master Cleanse. The Master Cleanse. Do y'all remember that? He did that for 10 days prior to that weigh-in. And mind you, he's doing that. So not eating any calories for real. And on top of that, exercising as much as I just said he was exercising, for him to get on that scale and see that 239 pounds down. And then not only that, they had to do some type of like urinalysis every so often. When Danny did his last urinalysis before his weigh-in, there was blood in his urine. When he said that, I was like, what? There was blood in his urine, and it was coming from the fact that he was literally so dehydrated because all he was doing was drinking that Master Cleanse thing, right? And then just running, doing all this cardio, all this water that he's constantly losing. He's not replenishing it like that. And he's not even eating to potentially get some type of, you know, water or whatever from the fruit that he's eating, for example. He's not even eating. So he's running on fumes, literally. One thing that seemed to change from the very first season to the next season that really stood out to me was the fact that the producer said they were looking for people who were overweight, but they were particularly looking for people who were overweight and unhappy, very unhappy with their lives, with their weight, with the role that their weight may have played in the condition of their life. These were the people they were seeking out. So in the first season, that's what they went out and looked for. right? That's kind of like what they campaigned on. But after the show aired, he said they didn't even have to do that, right? Thousands of people were coming out and they were all overweight and they were all unhappy with their weight. So they started switching, the method that they were using to find people and to put people on the show, to really focusing on who had the best story. So then it went from, finding people who are unhappy and who have weight to lose and who are really wanting to lose that weight, to let me find somebody who has all those things, but they also have a really strong sob story, essentially, that's going to be something that you can follow on TV. And this is when we're introduced or reintroduced to Joelle. You may remember Joelle. Joelle was from season 7, and she was a part of a partner group. So it was her and it was Carla. Now, for me, this was very exciting because this is one of the first times, if not the first time, that I saw Black women actually on the show. I would have to go look back through the other seasons before that, but I don't think I had ever seen that. So I would be finding myself in people who were close to my age or close to my weight or, whatever. But this time it was like, oh, these are people who actually look like me. Like, let's see what this looks like for them. So keeping along the lines of wanting to tell a good story, as Joelle comes in and she's auditioning for the show, a big part of her story is that she's recently gone to the doctor and she is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, right? Now, another big kind of selling point for her and Carla was the fact that Carla happened to be very, very obese, and she was going to be and ended up being the biggest woman that they had by that point. So this was season 7 on the show. So you have the biggest woman, you have this woman who has type 2 diabetes, you have this duo, they do this really like fun, kind of audition tape that shows their personalities, and the producers absolutely love it. So they bring in Joelle and Carla as a part of that season's partners. Oh, Joelle. When I was first introduced to Joelle on the show, it's like you wanted to root for her and Carla as partners. But on the show, oftentimes, Joelle was kind of like slacking, or at least perceived as slacking, to the point that Bob most certainly went off real bad. Real bad. Even Jillian was like, oh, oop, can't believe you just did that. But he was like, girl, I keep telling you to run for 30 seconds and you literally keep stopping at 20 seconds. Just push instead of complaining, right? He would tell her things like that. And at points, it was very, very abrasive and it was a lot. Obviously, we find out in the documentary that, I don't even know if this happens in the first, I don't know if this happens in the first episode, so I don't want to say this. Let's just say that there were this was triggering. This was triggering for her to have experienced him, yelling and things like that. But we don't know that as we're watching. And it more so just looks like Joelle is just always complaining. She's just like never wanting to really like pick up the slack. She always has an excuse. She's constantly every single week the lowest one on the way in. So the audience had kind of built up this feeling towards her. It was to the point that even Carla was like, girl, like, get it together. Like, they would get into little, tiffs and arguments, or like there was a scene where Carla was trying to motivate her and Joelle went off and was like, you're not the trainer. So I have additional thoughts, but I just feel that maybe we should discuss in the comments, because we got to keep going through this episode. So at this point, we're reintroduced to Allie Sweeney, who was the host from season 4 to season 16. And with Allie, we just really get to look back at some of her highlights from the show. And she was really more so used as like the person who provided like a comfort for the contestants. She was kind of like the person who would ask them those deeper questions and things like that. She did also end up being the person who had to give pushback whenever those allegations came out about Jillian. But we will talk about that later, because that comes out in a later episode. But the point is, we are introduced to Allie and we kind of start talking about her role and her observations while she was on the show. So by this point, they've set us up where we're seeing the audition tapes. We kind of have an idea of the type of person that's signing up, what the mindset is, how the show was created, all those different things. Then we get to the point of, well, what happens now that they have made it to the show? So they talk about how they get into these hotel rooms and they have to be like locked in their hotel for a couple of days while everything is being sorted out, including their contracts. A lot of the contestants talked about how the whole thing with the contracts really did not provide any room room for them to seek any legal counsel or do anything, because there were so many people interested in being a part of this show that when someone like Tracy, for example, went to the producers or went to whomever for the show and said, hey, like, I would like to have an attorney review this, their response was just kind of like, I mean, you can have an attorney review it, but there are literally thousands of people who are willing to just sign this right now. Now, Danny was someone who also said that he felt that kind of pressure from signing the contracts and everything because a lot of what the contracts had in them was regarding their health, and particularly just pretty much saying, if you die, you understand that you are assuming this risk. That reminds me of like when I went skydiving. It's literally just like in big black words, like you could die from this. It's not in confusing like legal jargon or anything like that. So that's what they're saying that they had to sign to be a part of this show, as they just got whisked away from their families overnight. They're in a hotel room. Their entire lives are about to change, and they're under pressure to sign this contract because they cannot move forward without signing it. And there literally are thousands upon thousands of people who would be willing to take that spot and just sign the contract. Now, once they actually got to the ranch, the very first day in terms of exercise, their first challenge that they had to do was to be burning 6,000 calories that day. Are you understanding that? 6,000 calories burned. And of course, once they got there, they had to deal with those temptation challenges. Now, this is what I wrote down. This temptation challenge in particular was eating meant that you got to go home. You would still be weighed in, but whoever ate the most calories in 5 minutes while they were alone with food could earn the chance to go home and see their family. How is this a temptation challenge? Right? This is where we go from the like, okay, you've got to put some kind of temptation or like a challenge in this. Otherwise, there's going to be a critique or there's going to be pushback on the fact that this is nothing like real life. This is not like the real world. They're living in a bubble. But like, at what point do we say this is doing too much? Also, when they asked Bob about that in particular, he literally was like, ask the producers, they did that shit. I was like, he was like, this was their show. Like, they were just doing all types of nonsense. Like, ask them why they were doing that. And I was like, you know what? Period, Bob. Bob was like, I didn't have nothing to do with that. Now, at this point, Joelle says for her that's when she really realized, like, hold on, this whole Biggest Loser thing. And again, you have to remember at that time, the show had really been pushed as it wasn't in the preliminary seasons anymore. So like people really took the Biggest Loser kind of more as a positive thing. It wasn't really seen like you wanted to be the Biggest Loser. But this whole issue with the temptation challenges really made Joelle think, wait a second, like kind of really starting to figure out the show is making fun of me, I think. And she said that was something that she kind of just put in the back of her mind. And that was her response, not just to the temptation challenges, but also to what they were doing in terms of exercise. Because remember, her partner was Carla. Carla was at the time the largest woman who had ever been on Biggest Loser. And they had Carla go onto, like the bars and put her weight onto those bars, those parallel bars on purpose, right? Because we find out that this was something that producers had asked them to do, because they thought that it would be funny or entertaining or good TV or whatever for her to be this biggest woman trying to balance herself on something that, first of all, may have been dangerous, may not have even held her weight, and did end up being dangerous because she fell. And so this is why at this point, Joelle's like, wait a minute. So this is like loser in a different way. You all are just trying to embarrass us. This is really where the fit for TV element comes in, where they're talking about how contestants were puking, they were passing out, they were having all these different like scary things happen to them during this entire process, but all of it being done for the sake of it being good TV, and the producers egging that on and wanting them to do that even more. So this is when we meet Dr. H, because the show does have a doctor who is supposed to be advising and kind of making sure that the physical exercise that they're doing and the amount that they're eating and everything is healthy. He's running blood tests and things like that. And he is actually against a lot of the different things, a lot of the challenges that they're doing, a lot of the things that the trainers were telling the contestants to do. He's against a lot of those things. One of his biggest issues that he points out is how in the beginning seasons of the show, you would usually have a woman that was somewhere in the 200-pound range, and then you would have a man who was somewhere in the 300-pound range. But as the show went on and as the show became more popular, the contestants started to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, you have people who are morbidly obese, and you have them doing extreme exercise. And this is where it gets incredibly uncomfortable, unsafe, right? Unsafe for the contestants and very uncomfortable for him as a doctor who's supposed to be advising and not even necessarily being told when certain challenges are going to be happening. For example, not being aware, which one of those challenges was the challenge with Tracy. So in season 8, they decide to change things up a little bit where before people can even get on the show, they have a group of finalists. They decide to take them to the beach to do a challenge to even get on the show, which was running 1 mile. And so Tracy is one of the contestants for season 8. And there's also Danny, which is the person who we met in the beginning who has regained all of his weight. So Tracy is there. We find out in real time now that Tracy is actually dealing with a ton of issues at home, personal issues with her husband. And she is really wanting to win this and have the opportunity to get on the show because she thinks that if she loses this weight, that it's going to completely turn her life around and save her marriage. So Tracy takes off running on the beach. And she almost gets to the finish line when she completely collapses and she cannot move her upper body. She cannot stand up. Everybody is trying to gather around her and get her to stand up. And then all of a sudden we see a helicopter come in and Tracy is air flighted to the hospital. And that is where we end episode 1. The quote I wrote down from the end of the episode says that you can't have a show based on weight loss that is safe. So that's where we end for episode 1. What do you think about this? I want to hear your comments below, and I will see you for the second episode of this docuseries.